The lights glistened above, their soft glow casting a warm, inviting ambiance over the pristine tables adorned with fresh white linens. At Le Grande Amérique, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, diners were accustomed to whispered conversations, gentle laughter, and the finest wines. The clinking of glasses and the occasional polite chuckle created a symphony of luxury and exclusivity. Maya Thompson sat alone, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit that hinted at her taste for simplicity and elegance. Her sharp, discerning gaze moved over the menu as she traced each line, contemplating her choices for the evening. She appeared unassuming to those around her, a striking woman who exuded confidence yet managed to blend seamlessly with her surroundings. Few could guess that she was one of the FBI's most respected agents, a brilliant, resilient force within the bureau, known for her unparalleled investigative instincts and unwavering sense of justice. As the waiter approached with a respectful nod, Maya ordered her meal, her voice steady, self-assured. She looked forward to this evening of solitude and quiet, a rare escape from the intensity of her work. But her tranquility would soon be shattered. Across the room, a tall, broad-shouldered man in uniform had been eyeing her from the moment she walked in. Officer John Grant, a seasoned cop with a hardened face, looked at Maya with a scrutinizing glare that spoke volumes. In his eyes, she didn't belong here, not in this restaurant. And perhaps, he thought with disdain, not in this part of the city at all. Grant's reputation on the force was well known, especially among those who had the misfortune of encountering his unyielding and prejudiced tendencies. To him, Maya was an anomaly in this setting, a black woman sitting alone in a place where he didn't think she should be. The moment he approached her table, Maya sensed trouble. She looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching, a hint of curiosity mixed with wariness in her eyes. The officer's lips curled in a thin, condescending smile as he stepped closer. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his tone laced with a forced politeness. "Mind if I ask what brings you here tonight?" Maya's expression remained calm. "Just dinner," she replied, meeting his gaze levelly. Her tone was respectful, yet held an underlying firmness. Grant's eyes narrowed as if searching for a flaw, a reason to validate his suspicions. "It's just that we don't often see people of all walks in a place like this." His implication hung heavy in the air. Maya's hand remained steady as she folded her menu, placing it gently on the table. She had dealt with men like him before, those who used their authority as a shield for their prejudice. But she also knew the value of restraint. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice cool, with a note of measured caution. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. "Just making sure everything's in order. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." "Understood," Maya replied, her eyes sharp. "But unless you're here on official business, I'd prefer to enjoy my meal in peace." The tension at the table was palpable. Other diners had begun to notice the exchange, their glances veiled but curious. In this refined setting, confrontations were uncommon, especially ones that involved a woman of Maya's stature and an officer in uniform. But Grant was undeterred. He leaned forward, his face now mere inches from hers. "I think I'm going to need to see some ID. Miss, just routine." Maya's heart pounded, but her face remained calm, her gaze steady. She reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet, her fingers brushing over her FBI badge, hidden just beneath her driver's license. She could have revealed it then, ended the encounter with one simple flash of authority. But Maya decided against it. She wanted to see how far he would go. Handing over her ID with a composed grace, she watched him as he scrutinized it. A look of skepticism etched on his face. But it wasn't enough for Grant. He glanced at her ID, then back at her, as if expecting her to falter. "You wouldn't happen to have any proof of employment, would you?" he asked, his voice loud enough now to draw the attention of more diners. Maya saw a few heads turn, eyes widening at the scene unfolding in this polished restaurant. Maya's patience was wearing thin. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, her expression unreadable. "And why would I need that, officer?" she inquired smoothly, a hint of steel beneath her words. His smile twisted. "Let's just say I like to be thorough. Can't be too careful these days." The implication was clear, his message cutting through the thin veil of politeness he'd worn. Maya knew she could diffuse the situation in an instant by revealing her position within the FBI. But something held her back. Perhaps it was a sense of justice. A desire to see how far his bias would take him. Or perhaps it was simply the principle of the matter. Grant's patience finally broke. "You're coming with me," he declared, his voice sharp. Without waiting for a response, he grabbed her arm, tugging her from her seat with an authority that bordered on aggression. Gasps rippled through the room as diners watched, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort. Maya didn't resist, her face calm, her posture dignified, but her mind was already calculating her next moves. She let him lead her outside, past the judgmental stares, past the whispered words. The cool night air hit her skin as they exited the restaurant. And Grant paused, preparing to radio for backup. But as he turned to call for his team, Maya spoke, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I think you should take a closer look at my ID." "Officer Grant." He froze, her words jolting him. Slowly, reluctantly, he looked down at her ID, this time catching the faint, glinting edge of her FBI badge tucked just behind her driver's license. His face went pale as realization dawned. She watched him closely, relishing the shock, the disbelief etched in his features. "I'm Special Agent Maya Thompson, FBI," she said quietly, her voice hardening with authority. "And I'd suggest you think very carefully about your next move." Grant's hand fell from her arm, his expression twisting from smugness to fear. In that moment, Maya knew that the tables had turned. What had started as a misguided act of discrimination would soon transform into a life-altering mistake for Officer Grant. Maya didn't move as the color drained from Officer Grant's face. For a fleeting moment, he looked like he might try to salvage his authority. But the revelation of her FBI badge had unraveled his confidence. He quickly glanced around, realizing that the onlookers inside the restaurant could still see them through the large glass windows. His hands, which had earlier gripped her arm with such force, now hung awkwardly at his sides, as if unsure of what to do. Still calm and collected, Maya stepped back slightly, watching as he fumbled with his words. I didn't realize. I mean, it's standard protocol." Maya held up a hand, stopping his stumbling apology mid-sentence. Her tone was cold, measured, each word sharp and deliberate. "Officer Grant, your protocol doesn't include harassing civilians, let alone high-ranking federal agents. This is no ordinary mistake. This is a gross misuse of authority." Grant's mouth opened and closed, his expression a mix of indignation and rising fear. The authority he had brandished just moments ago now felt like a hollow shell, stripped away under the steady gaze of the woman he had so callously mistreated. "This isn't how we do things," Maya continued, her voice barely above a whisper, yet laced with power. "In my line of work, respect for justice and the people we protect is non-negotiable. What were you hoping to accomplish tonight? Proving a point?" His gaze fell to the ground, avoiding her eyes. But Maya wasn't finished. She leaned in, her words now almost a murmur but loaded with meaning. "You see, Officer Grant, I'm well aware of the authority that comes with a badge, and I also know the responsibility that comes with it. But tonight, you showed neither." The silence between them was thick. The street sounds around them dulled as if even the city itself was holding its breath. Inside the restaurant, patrons whispered among themselves, their eyes fixed on the scene outside. What had begun as an uncomfortable spectacle had become a quiet triumph, one that spoke to the very core of Maya's principles. Finally, Grant mustered the courage to meet her gaze. "Look, this was all a misunderstanding. There's no need to make this any bigger than it has to be." Maya's expression remained steely. "A misunderstanding?" She let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Tell me, officer, how often do you misunderstand the presence of a black woman in an upscale setting?" Grant flinched at her words, his cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and residual defiance. "That's not what I meant," he muttered. "Then what did you mean?" she pressed, giving him no room for escape. "Because I'm standing here, an FBI agent with years of service, and you assumed the worst of me before I'd even spoken a word. That says more about your intent than anything else." His silence was telling, and the weight of her accusation hung between them like an indictment. Maya took a deep breath, her gaze softening slightly, though her tone remained firm. "I'm giving you an opportunity, Officer Grant," she said, "an opportunity to look at what happened here and decide who you want to be going forward. Because believe me, this will not be forgotten." Just then, the sound of footsteps approached as a restaurant manager, alerted by the onlookers, stepped outside, his face flushed with concern. Is everything all right here?" he asked, casting nervous glances between Maya and Officer Grant. Maya nodded, slipping her ID back into her bag. "Thank you. Yes, everything is under control," she replied, a note of finality in her voice. "But I appreciate you checking in." The manager gave a hesitant smile, glancing once more at Grant, who stood rigid, his discomfort plain. Sensing that there was nothing more he could do, the manager retreated back into the restaurant, giving the two a final nod of assurance. When they were alone once more, Maya took one last look at Officer Grant, who seemed frozen in place. She reached into her bag, pulling out a business card with a simple, understated design. "Special Agent Maya Thompson, FBI." With a slight smile, she handed it to him. "If you ever need help understanding your responsibility, officer," she said, her voice now almost gentle, "feel free to give me a call." He stared at the card in his hand, the reality of his actions beginning to sink in as he realized the enormity of the mistake he had made. As Maya turned to walk away, her heels clicking with quiet confidence on the pavement, Officer Grant stood rooted to the spot, a man left questioning everything he thought he knew. Back inside, the whispers continued as Maya returned to her table, her calm demeanor never wavering. She ordered her meal as if nothing had happened, her composure and dignity in stark contrast to the events that had just unfolded. Yet behind her poised exterior, her mind was already working, considering her next steps and the implications of the encounter. Tonight, she had defended herself with grace and intelligence, a small but significant battle in a much larger war for respect and justice. But for Officer Grant, it was only the beginning of a reckoning that would leave him questioning his own role in a system that so easily wielded authority without accountability. And as she sipped her wine, Maya allowed herself a moment to reflect. She knew that her work was far from over, that the path ahead would be long and challenging. But she also knew that her resolve was stronger than ever, a quiet but unwavering determination that no force could break. The card sat heavy in Officer Grant's hand as if it carried the weight of everything he'd tried to avoid facing. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at the stark letters spelling out Maya's title and name, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was as if the letters mocked him, a silent reminder of his mistake. His hand trembled slightly as he looked back up, watching Maya walk back toward the restaurant entrance, her every step exuding a confidence he now realized he could never shake. The scene replayed in his mind, the words she'd spoken echoing in the silence around him. She had offered him a rare opportunity to reconsider, to change, to reflect, yet instead of feeling relief, he felt an unfamiliar sense of shame creeping over him, a weight settling on his chest. As Maya re-entered the restaurant, she moved with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen and handled far worse than a petty, racially motivated confrontation. Her expression was calm, her posture impeccable, giving no outward indication of the encounter she'd just endured. The diners who had been watching quickly averted their eyes, pretending to return to their meals, though their hushed whispers carried her name and title. Words like FBI and agent were whispered with a mix of awe and disbelief, transforming her in their minds from a figure of suspicion to one of quiet power. The maitre d', who had witnessed part of the commotion from a distance, approached her as she returned to her table, his face a blend of concern and respect. "Ms. Thompson, is there anything I can do to ensure you're comfortable? Please accept our apologies for the disruption." Maya offered him a gentle but firm smile, one that spoke volumes. "Thank you, but there's no need to apologize. Some people simply need to be reminded of their responsibilities," she replied, her voice low and composed. There was a reassuring warmth in her tone that subtly shifted the atmosphere in her favor. The maitre d' gave her a respectful nod, retreating back to his station, and Maya took her seat again, smoothing her napkin over her lap with a steady hand. As she sat, Maya noticed the lingering eyes of a few patrons around her. She was accustomed to being in the public eye, though usually under very different circumstances. The calm, controlled exterior she now wore was a practiced skill, honed over years in the bureau, where she had learned to compartmentalize her emotions and focus on the task at hand, regardless of the challenges she faced. Yet, beneath her collected demeanor, a quiet resolve had ignited, a reminder of the purpose that drove her forward each day. The waiter returned with her appetizer, placing it before her with a slightly shaky hand. "Please let me know if there's anything else I can bring you," he said, his tone noticeably deferential. Maya gave him a polite nod. "Thank you. I'll be fine." She picked up her fork and took a small bite, savoring the subtle flavors of the dish. The evening resumed its normal rhythm around her. The clinking of glasses, the low murmur of conversations, the faint music that played softly in the background. Yet she could feel the undercurrent of change. A shift in the room's energy, a silent acknowledgement of her presence and what had transpired. As she continued her meal, Maya's thoughts drifted to Officer Grant. In her line of work, she had encountered countless individuals like him. People who wielded power not as a means of protection but as a weapon. A way to reinforce their own insecurities and prejudices. She had witnessed the damage they could inflict, the lives they could ruin with a single act of unchecked authority. But what Officer Grant had failed to understand was that Maya was not a nameless, faceless target. She was someone who knew exactly how to navigate power. Someone who had dedicated her life to dismantling injustices like the one he had so carelessly perpetuated. Her thoughts shifted back to her earlier days at the FBI, where she had often been the only black woman in the room, navigating spaces filled with men who doubted her abilities, who questioned her worth. She had learned early on that resilience was not only necessary but vital. Her mentors had taught her that composure could be her greatest weapon, that a calm mind could overcome even the most relentless prejudice. And tonight, she had proven to herself yet again that strength was not always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet dignity of standing firm in the face of ignorance. A short while later, as she finished her meal, Maya felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Not from the food itself but from the knowledge that she had turned an act of discrimination into a moment of reckoning. She had forced Officer Grant to confront his actions, to question the motives behind his authority. She knew that people like him rarely changed overnight, but she hoped that tonight would linger in his mind, an uncomfortable reminder that his actions held consequences, that those he sought to oppress would not always remain silent. As she rose from her seat, preparing to leave, she caught the eyes of a young woman at a nearby table who had been watching her intently. The woman's face held a look of admiration, a silent acknowledgement of Maya's strength. Maya gave her a small nod, a gesture of solidarity that needed no words. The young woman smiled back, her expression one of gratitude and understanding. Stepping out into the cool night air, Maya paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The city lights stretched out before her, a tapestry of brightness against the dark sky, each light representing a story, a life. She knew that her work extended beyond the walls of the bureau, beyond the confines of her title. She was part of a larger fight, one that required courage and persistence, a fight for justice and equality in a world that often fell short of those ideals. As she walked away from the restaurant, her thoughts returned briefly to Officer Grant. She wondered if he would take her words to heart, if he would allow this experience to shift his perspective, even slightly. But deep down, Maya understood that her purpose was not to change him. Her purpose was to stand as a reminder that people like her existed, that they were strong, resilient, and unyielding. Maya slipped her hands into her pockets as she made her way down the bustling city streets. She was at peace, her resolve as steady as ever. Tonight had been a small victory, a reminder that, even in the face of prejudice, she held the power to define her own path. And as she walked away, she knew that this was just one chapter in a much larger story. A story that she was determined to write with integrity, courage, and grace. The next morning, Maya walked into the FBI headquarters with a sense of purpose. The encounter with Officer Grant had been troubling, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was so common, a reminder of the pervasive discrimination that existed even in the most modern cities. But Maya was not the type to let such a transgression slide. She was prepared to make sure that Officer Grant, and others like him, understood the cost of misusing their power. Her supervisor, Special Agent David Richards, sat across from her as she recounted the incident, his expression growing grim. Richards was a seasoned agent, known for his dedication to upholding the Bureau's standards. He listened carefully, his brows furrowing as Maya detailed each part of the encounter. When she finished, a silence settled between them. "Grant overstepped," Richards said, his voice low and steady. "And it sounds like he's done so before. Maya nodded. From what I could gather, his record has seen complaints, but nothing ever seems to reach disciplinary action. Either they get brushed aside, or he finds a way to spin his side of the story. Richards leaned back, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. This time is different. You're an agent, and this will not be ignored. We'll bring this to his precinct. Within hours, an official complaint was filed with the local precinct, sparking the beginning of an internal investigation. Officer Grant's superiors were alerted, and Maya was asked to come in and provide a formal statement. By the time she arrived at the precinct, word of the incident had spread through the department, her name now known to officers who eyed her with both respect and curiosity. She felt their gazes as she walked in, sensing a mixture of apprehension and admiration. Detective Lisa Monroe, the officer assigned to handle her statement, greeted Maya with a firm handshake, her gaze steady and professional. "Agent Thompson," she said, her voice calm but respectful. "Thank you for coming in today. Let's get started." In the quiet interview room, Maya recounted the events in meticulous detail. Detective Monroe listened closely, taking notes and asking occasional questions to clarify specifics. There was no room for doubt. Maya's account was clear and consistent, a testament to her years of training and experience. When Maya finished, Monroe looked up, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Agent Thompson. I'm sorry you had to go through that. This department has had issues with certain officers, but your case may be what finally brings some much-needed changes." Maya's lips tightened into a slight smile, one that held a glimmer of determination. "This isn't just about me, Detective. It's about anyone who's been treated unfairly because someone misused their authority. If my experience can make a difference, then it's worth pursuing." Monroe nodded, her respect for Maya evident. "I'll make sure this goes through the right channels. Officer Grant will face a disciplinary hearing, and we'll bring up every relevant complaint filed against him." As Maya stood to leave, Monroe extended her hand once more. "Thank you for your bravery, Agent Thompson. It's not easy going against one of our own, but it's the right thing to do." Maya shook her hand firmly. "It's our responsibility to hold each other accountable," she replied, a quiet but powerful conviction in her voice. 2 weeks passed, and the investigation moved swiftly, fueled by Maya's position and the urgency her case brought. Officer Grant's record was pulled for review, and with each file, the precinct uncovered a troubling pattern of behavior, instances where he had used his authority to intimidate or control, often targeting individuals based on racial or economic prejudice. Witnesses and former complainants came forward, emboldened by Maya's willingness to take a stand. During this time, news of the case reached the media, and it wasn't long before headlines splashed across the city's newspapers. "FBI agent speaks out against local officers' misconduct." The titles read, "Bringing Officer Grant's actions into public scrutiny." People from all walks of life began to voice their support for Maya, lauding her courage and resilience. The day of Officer Grant's disciplinary hearing arrived, and the precinct was abuzz with tension. Maya entered the hearing room with Richards by her side, both agents exuding an air of professionalism that commanded attention. Officers and city officials filled the room, some curious, others wary, as they watched the proceedings unfold. Officer Grant sat across from her, his face set in a grim line, his gaze avoiding hers. Beside him sat his lawyer, an expression of cold determination on his face. As the proceedings began, each detail of the incident at the restaurant was recounted. Maya remained composed as she answered questions, her voice steady, her account unwavering. Grant's lawyer attempted to undermine her credibility, subtly suggesting that she might have misinterpreted his intentions. But Maya countered each insinuation with calm, factual clarity, emphasizing her years of experience in reading people, in understanding motivations and intentions. Officer Grant's actions were not simply the result of a misunderstanding, she stated firmly. They were a targeted display of authority rooted in bias. "As a federal agent, I've dedicated my career to protecting people from exactly this type of abuse." The weight of her words hung heavily in the room, a reminder that her accusations carried the strength of truth and integrity. Grant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his facade of confidence beginning to crack under her unflinching gaze. After hours of testimony and cross-examinations, the decision was made. Officer Grant was found guilty of misconduct and was stripped of his badge. his years of authority and influence reduced to a hollow title. As he was escorted from the room, Maya felt a sense of resolution, a quiet but powerful triumph for justice. Outside the hearing room, the precinct was filled with murmurs of disbelief and approval. Many officers looked at Maya with newfound respect, their admiration evident as she walked past them. Some extended nods of acknowledgement, a silent show of support for the stand she had taken. Maya felt a mixture of relief and pride. This was a victory, not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in justice and equality. Richards joined her as they left the precinct, his gaze warm with approval. "You handled that with exceptional poise. Agent Thompson, you've made an impact here, and I believe it will echo far beyond these walls." Maya nodded, a slight smile on her lips. "It's a small step, but it's a start. Change takes time, but sometimes, it just needs a push in the right direction." As they walked out into the bright afternoon light, Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle within her. She knew that this case would be a defining one, both for herself and for the city's police force. Her actions had set a precedent, a reminder that abuse of power would not go unchecked, that there were people willing to fight for what was right. In the days that followed, Maya received countless letters and messages from people who had been touched by her story. Some shared their own experiences of discrimination, expressing gratitude for her courage. Others offered words of support, reminding her that she was not alone in this fight. Maya read each message with a sense of connection, knowing that her actions had resonated with so many. She had become a symbol of strength and integrity, a beacon of hope for those who believed in justice. And though her journey was far from over, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to continue her work with even greater resolve. In the end, Maya's story became more than just a fight against one man's prejudice. It became a testament to the power of standing up, of using one's voice to create change. And as she looked out over the city she had sworn to protect, she knew that this was only the beginning. As the days passed after her initial statement, Maya could sense the tension rippling through the precinct. Officer Grant's behavior, once whispered about but never formally challenged, was now under a magnifying glass. His colleagues found themselves in uncomfortable conversations, some forced to confront their complicity in allowing his unchecked behavior to persist, while others grappled with the revelation of the harm it had caused. The precinct was divided. A faction of officers felt betrayed by Maya's actions, clinging to a misguided sense of loyalty to their brother in blue, refusing to acknowledge Grant's misuse of authority. They saw Maya's stance as an attack on the force itself, and resentment brewed among them, their muttered comments becoming louder with each passing day. Others, however, were quietly inspired, their respect for Maya growing as they recognized the strength it took to expose the flaws in a system she was part of. Detective Monroe, the officer assigned to Maya's case, became one of her strongest allies within the precinct. The more Monroe dug into Grant's record, the more she realized just how deep his misconduct ran. Reports were discovered, cases filed away and long forgotten, recounting instances where he had leveraged his badge to intimidate, harass, and even coerce individuals from marginalized communities. Monroe read each file with a sense of anger, unable to ignore the clear pattern emerging. One afternoon, Monroe approached Maya, her face a mix of admiration and frustration. "Agent Thompson," she said, setting a stack of files on the desk in front of her. "These are just some of the complaints against Grant that were quietly dismissed or ignored. He's been getting away with this for years." Maya scanned the pages, her eyes hardening as she read each line. "How many people has he targeted?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "Dozens, from what we've found," Monroe replied. "It's staggering, and what's worse is how easily these were pushed aside. People lodged complaints, went through the process, and nothing came of it. He was shielded by the system, by the silence of others." Maya looked up, her gaze meeting Monroe's. "And now?" Monroe's lips pressed into a determined line. "Now, people are talking. Your case has given others the courage to come forward. Some of the officers who worked with him are starting to admit they saw things, heard things, but didn't feel they could speak up. Your actions have set a precedent. Change may be slow, but it's happening." Maya nodded, a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. She knew that meaningful change often came with a price, but she was willing to pay it if it meant creating a safer, more just environment for everyone as the disciplinary hearing drew nearer. Officer Grant's world began to crumble. He found himself isolated, his usual support system within the precinct fractured by the allegations against him. The few who still stood by him did so out of misplaced loyalty, refusing to acknowledge the mounting evidence against him. Grant's expression grew darker with each passing day, his once confident demeanor replaced by a sullen bitterness. Behind closed doors, he raged against Maya, accusing her of targeting him unfairly. But deep down, he knew he was guilty. The complaints, the stories, the witnesses, they were too many to ignore, and no amount of denial could erase the truth. At night, in the privacy of his apartment, Grant found himself haunted by his past actions. Memories of the faces he had intimidated, the fear he had instilled, resurfaced, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his choices. He had wielded his authority recklessly, confident that he was untouchable. Now, he realized the depth of his miscalculation. Maya's courage had shattered his illusion of invincibility, exposing him as a man whose power had been built on intimidation and prejudice. Meanwhile, Maya continued her work at the bureau with an unwavering focus. Though the case weighed on her mind, each day, she received messages from people across the city and beyond, thanking her for her courage, sharing their own experiences, and expressing their support. She read each letter carefully, taking comfort in the knowledge that her actions had resonated with so many. The community was beginning to see her not just as an FBI agent, but as a champion of justice, a voice for those who had been silenced. The morning of the hearing arrived with an electric charge in the air. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse, their cameras trained on the doors, eager to capture the story that had gripped the city. As Maya stepped out of the car, she was greeted by a crowd of supporters holding signs and cheering her name. The sight filled her with a quiet sense of pride and gratitude. She nodded to them, acknowledging their presence, before making her way inside. In the hearing room, Officer Grant sat at the defense table, his face pale and expression grim. He looked up as Maya entered, his gaze hardening as their eyes met. But Maya remained calm, her presence commanding yet unassuming. She took her seat, mentally preparing herself for the hours of questioning that lay ahead. As the hearing began, witnesses were called to testify, each recounting their experiences with Grant in stark detail. Former complainants spoke of the fear he had instilled in them, the way he had used his badge as a weapon rather than a shield. Officers who had once worked alongside him hesitantly shared the instances they had observed but never reported, their voices tinged with guilt and regret. Maya listened to each testimony, her heart heavy yet resolute. She knew that this hearing was more than a judgment on Officer Grant. It was a reckoning for a system that had allowed his behavior to go unchecked. It was a moment of accountability, a chance to remind those in power that their actions, or lack thereof, had consequences. When Maya was finally called to the stand, the room fell silent, all eyes on her. She took a steadying breath, her gaze focused, her voice strong. She recounted the events of that night with unwavering clarity, painting a picture of the encounter that left no room for doubt. Her words were measured but powerful, each sentence a reminder of the responsibility that came with wearing a badge. The prosecutor asked her one final question. "Agent Thompson, what do you hope to accomplish with this testimony?" Maya looked directly at Officer Grant, her expression resolute. "I hope to remind every officer that their authority is a privilege, not a weapon. I hope to encourage those who have been silenced to speak up, to trust that there are people willing to stand with them. And I hope to create a precedent, a reminder that no one is above the law, no matter their position." Her words hung in the air, a powerful statement that resonated with everyone in the room. Even those who had initially resented her for speaking out found themselves moved by her conviction, recognizing the courage it took to confront injustice head-on. After hours of deliberation, the disciplinary board returned with their verdict. Officer Grant was found guilty of multiple counts of misconduct, and his badge was permanently revoked. The decision was met with a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice served. As he was led out of the room, his expression a mix of anger and shame, Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Outside, the crowd erupted into applause as news of the verdict spread. Maya emerged to find herself surrounded by supporters, their faces filled with gratitude and admiration. She accepted their words of thanks, humbled by the impact her actions had made. In the days that followed, Maya continued her work with a renewed sense of purpose. She had become a symbol of resilience and justice, a reminder that one person's courage could spark change in even the most entrenched systems. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but she was ready to face them. As she looked out over the city she had sworn to protect, Maya felt a quiet sense of triumph. She had faced the darkness within the system, and she had emerged stronger, her resolve unshaken. This victory was not just hers, it belonged to everyone who believed in justice, in equality, in the power of standing up for what was right. And as she walked forward, her head held high, she knew that this was only the beginning. The verdict had barely been announced when the precinct found itself in a state of quiet upheaval. Officer Grant's dismissal rippled through the ranks, creating a shift in perspective that many officers found unsettling. For some, it was a wake-up call; for others, a cause for resentment. Those who had silently witnessed Grant's misconduct were now forced to confront their own complicity. A weight that lingered in conversations and glances exchanged in the hallways. Detective Lisa Monroe, who had spearheaded much of the investigation alongside Maya, felt an unusual sense of responsibility toward her precinct. She knew that the case's impact wouldn't end with Grant's dismissal. It was a catalyst that had unearthed a history of silenced voices and overlooked complaints. Monroe saw the way younger officers looked to her, seeking guidance, and she felt a quiet determination to help rebuild a culture of integrity and transparency within the department. One afternoon, Monroe invited Maya back to the precinct to discuss the potential changes the case had inspired. As they sat across from each other in Monroe's office, the detective leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "You've done something here, Maya," she began, her tone sincere. "You've forced us to take a hard look at ourselves. I can't ignore the conversations I've overheard, the questions that have been raised. This place, my colleagues, we're changing, even if it's uncomfortable for some of us." Maya regarded her quietly, her eyes reflecting the weight of her own experiences. "Change is never easy, Detective," she replied, "but that's what makes it necessary. People are scared because they're being asked to hold themselves to a standard they've ignored for too long. But that's how we create progress." Monroe nodded, a glint of admiration in her eyes. "It's difficult, but it's the right kind of difficult. I can see that now." After a moment of silence, Monroe's gaze softened. "There's something else, too. Since the hearing, several other officers have come to me. Officers who worked alongside Grant over the years. They're starting to share their own encounters, admitting to things they witnessed but didn't report. It's as if your case gave them permission to come forward. They're ready to be part of the solution now." Maya listened, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. This was more than she had hoped for, a chain reaction that empowered others to speak up, to strive for something better. Her initial objective had been to hold Grant accountable, but in doing so, she had uncovered a collective need for accountability that transcended a single officer. Monroe handed her a slim folder, a thoughtful expression on her face. "We're creating a new protocol for handling misconduct reports," she explained. "I'd like your input, if you're willing. We want to make sure complaints are investigated thoroughly from now on, with no room for oversight. This case has taught us that silence can be just as damaging as the actions we ignore." Maya took the folder, nodding. "I'd be honored to help." The sense of responsibility in Monroe's words resonated deeply within her. She could see that the detective was sincere in her desire to create meaningful change. As they discussed the specifics of the new protocol, Maya felt a newfound respect for Monroe and the steps the department was willing to take. She knew it would be a long road, that not everyone would be willing to embrace these changes. But she could see a glimmer of hope in Monroe's dedication. They were laying the foundation for a better, more just future, one that would protect the rights and dignity of every person, regardless of background outside the precinct. The public response to the case was gaining momentum. News stations and local papers continued to cover Maya's story, and people from all walks of life began to view her as a symbol of resilience and strength. Community organizations reached out to her, expressing their gratitude for her courage and asking if she would consider joining them in advocating for policy reforms. Leaders from local civil rights groups, inspired by her stand, began organizing events and discussions, bringing attention to systemic issues within law enforcement. One evening, Maya was invited to speak at a community forum where locals gathered to discuss their own experiences with discrimination and abuse of power. Standing on the small stage, Maya felt the weight of the audience's expectations. The room was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and longing for change. As she began to speak, Maya's voice was steady but filled with conviction. When I first decided to confront Officer Grant's actions, I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew that taking a stand would put me in a difficult position, that it might isolate me from the very system I work to uphold. But I also knew that justice isn't something we can compromise on. We all deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, no matter who we are or where we come from. The audience listened intently, nodding in agreement as she continued. This fight isn't just about holding one person accountable. It's about challenging a mindset, a way of thinking that allows power to go unchecked. Each of you here tonight has a voice, a story, and together, we can demand better. We can create a future where our communities feel safe, where our rights are protected, and where those in power are held to the highest standard. After she finished, a young woman approached her, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Agent Thompson," she said softly. "You don't know what this means to people like me. I've spent years feeling like my voice didn't matter, like I was invisible. But seeing someone like you, someone who isn't afraid to speak up, it makes me believe that change is possible." Maya smiled, placing a reassuring hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Your voice matters, more than you know. We're all part of this change, together." As Maya left the forum, she felt a profound sense of connection to the community, a reminder that her role extended beyond the bureau. She was part of something larger, a movement that aimed to reshape the very foundation of justice and equality. Meanwhile, the precinct itself was evolving. Monroe's new protocols took effect, and officers were required to undergo diversity and ethics training, courses aimed at fostering empathy and understanding among the force. Workshops were held to educate officers on cultural competency, helping them recognize and address their own biases. Maya was invited to lead one of these workshops, a session attended by officers across the department, including some who had been wary of her. Standing before the group, Maya spoke openly about her experiences, the challenges she had faced, and the importance of accountability. She encouraged the officers to reflect on their roles as protectors of the community, to see their badges not as symbols of power but as symbols of trust and responsibility. One officer, a young recruit, raised his hand hesitantly. "Agent Thompson, how do you keep going when it feels like there's so much resistance to change?" Maya considered his question, her gaze steady. "Change takes time, and yes, it often meets resistance. But every step we take, no matter how small, is a step toward progress. It's about having the courage to stand firm. Even when it's difficult, the work we do is important, and it's worth every challenge we face." As the session concluded, Maya could see the impact her words had made. The officers left with a renewed sense of purpose, a recognition that their duty went beyond enforcing the law. It was about serving and protecting every member of the community. Without prejudice or bias. By the end of the month, the precinct had begun to transform. Complaints were now handled with transparency, and officers like Monroe became champions of the new protocol, fostering a culture of accountability and integrity. Maya's influence lingered in every corner of the department, a quiet but powerful reminder of the change that one person's courage could inspire. And as she continued her work at the bureau, Maya felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had faced opposition, broken down barriers, and sparked a movement within the community and the precinct alike. Her actions had set in motion a shift that would ripple through the city for years to come, a legacy of justice that would inspire future generations. Looking out over the city skyline one evening, Maya allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She knew the work was far from over, that challenges would continue to arise, but she also knew that she was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge that her actions, her courage, had already made a difference. And as she stood there, watching the lights of the city she had vowed to protect, she felt a quiet but unshakable resolve, a promise to herself and to the people she served that she would continue to fight for justice, no matter the cost. In the weeks following Officer Grant's hearing, Maya noticed a palpable shift both within the bureau and throughout the city. What had started as a personal stand for justice had ignited a citywide conversation about integrity, equality, and the importance of accountability within law enforcement. Maya's story had become a symbol, a catalyst for change that people regardless of background, could rally behind, with her position as a respected FBI agent and a figure of moral integrity. Maya found herself frequently invited to speak at community gatherings, city council meetings, and even educational institutions. She saw these engagements not only as opportunities to share her experiences but also as a way to inspire others to recognize their own power to create change. Each time she spoke, she emphasized the importance of courage and resilience, of taking a stand even when it meant risking isolation or opposition. One evening, she was invited to a town hall organized by the city's Civil Rights Committee. Hundreds gathered, filling every seat and standing space, eager to hear from the woman who had dared to challenge the system. As she took the stage, the audience erupted into applause, a wave of respect and admiration that brought a slight smile to Maya's face. When the room quieted, she began with her familiar calm and steady voice. The work we do for justice often begins with uncomfortable truths. When we see something wrong, our instinct may be to look away, to ignore it, to convince ourselves that it's not our problem. But true change only happens when we confront those truths, no matter how uncomfortable or challenging they may be. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people of all ages and backgrounds. I took a stand because I believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. I took a stand because I believe that a badge should never be a shield for abuse. And I took a stand because I knew that the actions we ignore today will become the injustices that others will have to fight tomorrow. Her words were met with silence, a silence filled with thought and reflection. And then, one by one, people began to clap, the applause swelling until it filled the entire hall. Afterward, dozens of people approached her, expressing their gratitude, sharing their own stories, and reaffirming their commitment to justice. Maya listened to each person, her heart swelling with a profound sense of purpose. This was why she had fought. This was why she would continue to fight in the following months. Maya's influence extended beyond the community and into the bureau itself. Special Agent David Richards, her supervisor, recognized the value Maya brought not only in her skill as an investigator but in her unyielding dedication to fairness and integrity. Under his guidance, Maya helped develop new training modules on cultural competency and ethics, programs aimed at encouraging agents to recognize and confront their biases. These modules became mandatory, marking a significant shift in the Bureau's approach to internal training. One afternoon, Richards called Maya into his office, his expression one of pride and respect. "Agent Thompson," he began, "I want you to know that the work you're doing here, it's changing lives. And it's changing the way we approach our responsibilities. You've raised the standard for all of us. And I can't thank you enough." Maya smiled, her gaze steady. "Thank you, sir. I've always believed that our strength as agents comes not just from our skills, but from our character. We have to lead by example if we want to make a real difference." Richards nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "And that's exactly what you've done. In fact, I'd like to propose something that I think would be a fitting next step for you. We're establishing a task force dedicated to investigating and addressing misconduct within our own ranks. And I can't think of anyone better suited to lead it than you." Maya felt a surge of pride and surprise. The opportunity to lead a task force, to create a lasting impact from within, was both an honor and a responsibility. "I'd be honored to take on that role, sir," she replied, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Together, we'll ensure that justice isn't just something we strive for, but something we embody." The creation of the task force marked a turning point, not only in Maya's career but in the Bureau's approach to internal accountability. Under her leadership, the team examined cases of alleged misconduct, focusing on instances where officers and agents had abused their power. Her presence lent the team an air of legitimacy, inspiring agents across the department to recognize that true justice required vigilance at every level. As her work progressed, Maya remained a fixture in the community, attending events and supporting grassroots initiatives focused on police reform and community empowerment. Her connections with civil rights leaders and community activists deepened, and together, they worked on a range of initiatives designed to foster trust and transparency between law enforcement and the communities they served. One of the most meaningful projects Maya spearheaded was a partnership with local schools. She organized a mentorship program where agents volunteered their time to meet with students, sharing insights into their work and listening to the concerns and perspectives of young people. Maya understood that building a better future required inspiring the next generation, showing them that justice was not an abstract concept but a commitment they could embody every day. During one of these mentorship sessions, a teenage girl named Alina approached Maya with a nervous but determined expression. "Agent Thompson," she began, "I want to be like you one day. I want to help people. To make a difference." Maya smiled, touched by the young girl's sincerity. "Alina, if you have the courage to speak up for what's right and the heart to care for others, you're already on your way. Remember that strength comes not just from power, but from kindness and integrity." The girl nodded, her face bright with inspiration. In that moment, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had set out to create change, but along the way, she had become a role model, a beacon for young people like Alina who dreamed of a better world months later. Maya stood before a gathering of city officials, law enforcement leaders, and community activists, the culmination of a year's worth of dedication, resilience, and hard work. The precinct where she had once been confronted was now a model of reform. A place where officers were held to a higher standard, and where Monroe and others like her continued to champion the principles of accountability and respect. Monroe herself approached the podium to introduce Maya, her voice filled with pride. "Today, we honor a woman who has shown us that justice is not just a word, but a way of life. Agent Thompson has reminded us that integrity is the foundation of any community. And that change is not only possible, it's necessary." Maya took the stage to a standing ovation, the weight of her journey resting on her shoulders like a cloak of honor. As she looked out over the crowd, she saw the faces of those she had inspired, of the officers who had redefined their roles, of the community members who had come together to create a city that upheld the values they believed in. Her voice was steady, yet filled with the fire of her convictions. "We've come a long way," she began, "but there is still so much work to be done. Let us continue to challenge ourselves, to hold ourselves accountable, and to stand together in our commitment to justice. This is our legacy, a legacy of resilience, of courage, and of unity. Together, we will continue to build a world where every person is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." The crowd erupted into applause, a collective promise to uphold the principles Maya had championed. And as she stepped off the stage, surrounded by supporters, friends, and colleagues, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced resistance, had fought through isolation and doubt, but she had emerged stronger, her resolve unbroken. In the end, Maya's journey was more than just a fight against one man's prejudice. It was a testament to the power of resilience, a beacon of hope for those who believed in a better future. And as she left the gathering that evening, she knew that her work, her fight for justice, was far from over, but she was ready, armed with the knowledge that her courage and determination had already changed lives, and that her story would inspire others to do the same. For Maya Thompson, justice was more than a duty, it was a calling, a commitment she would carry with her for the rest of her life. And as the city lights shone brightly against the night sky, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet but unyielding promise to continue her fight, no matter where it led. As Maya left the city hall that evening, the applause and admiration from the gathering echoed in her mind. She had fought not only for herself but for every person who believed in justice and accountability. And tonight, she felt the depth of what she had achieved. Yet she also knew that her journey was far from complete. This victory was a milestone, not an endpoint. There would always be more to do, more challenges to face. But tonight, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. A moment to appreciate how far she had come and how much her efforts had transformed the city. In the months following Officer Grant's dismissal, Maya's work had reshaped both the Bureau and the city's police precinct. The culture within the precinct had shifted significantly. Thanks to the new standards and protocols developed under her leadership, officers were encouraged to report misconduct without fear of retribution, and every complaint was met with transparency and thorough investigation. Monroe, who had once struggled with the implications of Maya's actions, had become one of the precinct's strongest advocates for accountability, her dedication inspiring her colleagues to approach their work with renewed integrity. Monroe herself had grown closer to Maya, often reaching out for guidance as she implemented the new policies. The two women shared a common vision, a commitment to creating a law enforcement culture that was both fair and just. Together, they formed a partnership rooted in mutual respect, and their influence became a driving force in the precinct's transformation. Monroe's leadership empowered other officers, especially those who had once been silent witnesses, to step forward and challenge the old ways of thinking that had enabled abuse. Beyond the precinct, Maya's influence extended into the community. She worked closely with civil rights leaders and local activists to establish programs that aimed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. Together, they launched an initiative called Justice in Action, a platform where citizens could voice their concerns, share their experiences, and hold law enforcement accountable in a transparent and constructive environment. Community members began to see the police force as partners rather than adversaries, fostering an environment of mutual respect and trust. One of the most impactful outcomes of Maya's work was the mentorship program she developed with local schools. Agents, officers, and community leaders volunteered their time to visit schools, engaging with students and teaching them about the values of integrity, responsibility, and justice. Maya believed that change began with education, that by inspiring young minds, she could help shape a future where fairness and equality were foundational principles. The mentorship programs soon became a citywide success, attracting students from diverse backgrounds. One afternoon, as Maya was speaking to a group of high school students, she noticed a young boy sitting at the back, his face tense with a look of skepticism and distrust. After her talk, he approached her hesitantly, his gaze shifting between her and the floor. "Agent Thompson," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't think people like you really cared about what happens to people like me." Maya knelt down, meeting his eyes with a gentle, understanding gaze. "What makes you think that?" she asked, her voice soft but encouraging. He shrugged, a hint of anger in his expression. "I've seen too many people get hurt by people who wear badges. I've seen people like me treated like they don't matter." Maya reached out, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I understand," she said sincerely, "and you're right to feel that way. But that's exactly why I'm here, to show you that there are people in law enforcement who care deeply about justice and fairness, who want to protect everyone, not just some people, and you have every right to hold us accountable, to demand that we live up to those principles." The boy looked at her, his expression softening as a glimmer of hope replaced the mistrust in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice carrying a mix of relief and gratitude. Moments like these reminded Maya of the importance of her work, the difference one person could make simply by showing compassion, by listening, by proving that justice was more than just a word, it was a commitment back at the Bureau. Maya's task force continued to grow in influence, setting a new precedent for transparency and accountability within federal law enforcement. Maya knew that change at such a high level came slowly, often meeting resistance, but she also knew that every small victory was a step toward a more ethical and equitable system. Her colleagues began to view her as more than just an agent, she was a symbol of integrity, a reminder that their roles carried a responsibility that extended beyond the badge. David Richards, her supervisor, frequently sought her insights on how to expand the reach of her task force's initiatives. Together, they worked on programs designed to identify and address systemic issues within law enforcement. Programs that would be implemented not only in their own department but potentially adopted nationwide. Maya had inspired a movement within the Bureau, one that prioritized ethical conduct and ensured that every agent understood the weight of their actions. Months later, the City Council recognized Maya's contributions with an award for exemplary service to the community. Standing on stage, she accepted the honor with humility, her gaze sweeping over the crowd that had gathered to celebrate her achievements. Community members, activists, students, fellow officers, and agents, each person represented a story, a voice, a life impacted by her work. As she began her speech, her voice was steady, filled with the strength of her convictions. "I am deeply honored to receive this recognition, but I want to make it clear that this award belongs to each and every person who has supported this mission, who has stood with me in the fight for justice. This journey was never about me alone. It was about creating a world where everyone is treated with respect, where dignity is not a privilege but a right." She paused, her gaze settling on the faces before her. "We've come a long way. But there is still work to be done. Let us continue to push forward, to hold ourselves and each other accountable. Let us build a future where every person, no matter who they are, can trust in the systems meant to protect them. Together, we can make this vision a reality." The audience erupted into applause, a wave of support that reinforced Maya's determination. In that moment, she knew that her journey had come full circle, from a single act of courage that challenged a system to a citywide movement that would inspire generations that evening. As Maya walked through the city streets, the lights illuminating the path ahead, she reflected on the legacy she had created. She had become more than just a federal agent, she was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for those who believed in justice. And as she gazed out over the city, she felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that her efforts had left an indelible mark, one that would continue to guide others long after she was gone. Maya's fight had transcended the boundaries of her profession, touching lives in ways she had never anticipated. Her journey had shown that courage, integrity, and compassion were the true foundations of justice. That one person's actions could ignite a movement and inspire change. As she turned toward her next steps, Maya knew that her mission was far from over. But she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she had the support of a community, a city, and a legacy of justice to guide her. For Maya Thompson, justice was more than an ideal, it was a promise she carried with her. A commitment to serve, to protect, and to inspire. And as the city lights shimmered in the distance, she felt a quiet but powerful resolve, knowing that her work, her legacy, would continue to light the path for those who came after her.